Welcome to this Programming for Cultural Heritage lecture. In this video, we're going to look at writing out JSON files. So we've already looked at writing out CSV files, and that has, using the CSV module to help it. Likewise, there's a JSON module to help you write out JSON files. And so there's a couple reasons why you'd want to do this, right? So you might be creating a new data set from an existing data set, or you might be combining multiple data sources together into a new data set, and you'd want to save that for later, right? So if you're creating a new data set or a subset of data, you'd always want to save it out. And if you were working with JSON data to begin with, then you'd probably want to save it out as JSON. And JSON is also a pretty good format to store your data in general, even if you're doing something like web scraping or something else, because it is very similar to Python dictionary, and it is very flexible as to model data, right? And so you can do things like repeatable fields using lists, nested dictionaries, nested lists, all those sorts of things. So JSON is just a very flexible serialization to store your data as a file. So we're going to be using the existing script that we started off with in the reading JSON video. So if you recall from that video, it was like a big file from Waggle data source that was the transcripts of various This American Life podcast episodes. So if we quickly review what that data file looked like, we can, or what that script looked like that we started off with in that lecture. Let me just find it really quickly. So this file had a number of episode data in it, and each one had like a speaker. And then in that lecture, we went through and pulled out all the times Ira Glass said something and kind of counted the utterances, right? When it kept track of the number of times Ira Glass said something, and then it counted if that was larger than 5, said it more than 5 times, and then it printed it out to the screen here, right? And so the result of running the script was kind of the top utterances from Ira Glass from this data set. So let's make sure it still works. We'll just run it again. It's called load data. And so in this case, what we want to do is, this is already creating a subset of data. And so maybe we want to write out that subset of data as JSON, right? Or you might even want to write this specific result set out as JSON to save it for later instead of just printing to the screen. So we'll do both, right? And so in this case, this first part here is building the data, right? And so it's storing all the data in this thing called IRTalk, which is a dictionary. And so to write out another Python dictionary as JSON, it's really simple. You just use the JSON module, and you say dump. And so dump is meaning dump to a file, and so you have to provide it a couple parameters. There's also a dump s, and that stands for dumping to a string. So if you wanted to print a JSON string to your console, you'd probably use dump s and not dump, because dump is reserved for writing to the file system. And so when you're writing using dump, you have to give it the variable you want to write to the file. In this case, it's IRTalk, right? And then the next thing you'd want to do is give it a where you want to write it to, right? And so to do that, we need to start off here with a with open statement. We'll say with open. We'll call it IRTalk.json. We make sure to be opening up as a W, right? And we'll say out or as out file. So now that the file is open, we can pass that out file variable to the dump command, and it will write it out as a new JSON file, and it's that simple. What's nice about JSON 2, though, is that you can do something called pretty print and make it a little bit more human readable, right? So if you ran this without adding this pretty print option, it would just be one long line of JSON, and it's okay, but it's not very usable in an editor, right? If you drag that file into your editor, it would just be like this one super long line that goes forever, and it might wrap, and it's extremely hard to read. But you can actually, using the JSON module, you can tell it to indent, and you pass it how many indentations you want it to use. So we'll say like one indentation will be 2 spaces. And so doing this way, we'll try running it again. It should uh, write out this file as a new file in that same directory. That should be all the contents of this dictionary. So I did that. So let's open it up and see if there's this IRTalk JSON file. And we can open up that and see here is all the utterances, right? So every one of them. So this might be fine for your purposes. This is kind of like printing out the results, but we could also do something where we are tracking, if you wanted to create a subset of data. So we could say IRTalk all, and we'll make that a list. And we could say, okay, if it gets to this point here, that means that the speakers are IR glass. And what we want to do is IRTalk all that appends, and we're going to add in the F data for that specific row, right? So we're building like a new list here of just a subset of the data that we want. And so we'll write that out also. So we'll say, let's copy this. We'll call this IRTalk all, and we'll say out file 2. And we gotta change that to 2 here, and here's the piece of data we want to write out. And so if you run this again, it's not only going to print out that or dump that result file, right, that we were printing out to the screen earlier before, but it's going to actually make a new subset of the data that we want to maybe come back and do some more analysis on, right? So, the result file only had a small kind of subset of the data. It just had the phrase and then the count, number of times it was said. This other file, if we look at it, has the original data in it too. So here's IRTalk all. And it's a slightly larger file because there's much more data in it. But so now this has all the metadata about that statement, that utterance, as they call it. So if you wanted to come in here and do what are the longest duration phrases that he said, or what are the average length of his utterances, etc. Right? You can come in here and do that now that you have all the data. So using this JSON.dump, you can create your own data sets, and this is really useful for later purposes because you can start thinking about, well, maybe it can have multiple scripts do different things, right? So maybe you write a script that reads a larger file or reads 2 files together and creates a new file and outputs that as a JSON file. And then you could have a second script that actually reads that new JSON file and does analysis on it or does some other kind of process on it. So you can really kind of think about simplifying your scripts into steps and then passing data between them using this JSON file format. So using this JSON module dumps, you can start sharing your JSON data to the file system and elsewhere. But I think that's it, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks, bye.